She's not married yet, but reveals the surprising truth about elastic band workouts. She stood in the corner of her bedroom holding a bright red elastic band, staring at it like it held the answer to a question she hadn't quite asked yet. Her reflection in the mirror looked tired, not from lack of sleep, but from trying too hard for too long. Like most of us, she'd convinced herself that real results only came from heavy weights, crowded gyms, or programs designed by people who never seemed to struggle. But something about this simple rubber band felt different, almost defiant in its simplicity. For years, she'd chased the idea of transformation through intensity, believing pain was the only language her body understood. She pushed through injuries, ignored warning signs, and measured progress by how exhausted she felt at the end of each session. It was a cycle that felt productive until it stopped working entirely. Then came the shoulder injury that changed everything. Not catastrophic, but persistent enough to make her question whether she was building strength or just breaking herself down in smaller, quieter ways. Her physical therapist suggested resistance bands as part of her recovery protocol, and she almost laughed. These colorful loops felt like toys compared to the iron plates she'd been lifting. But desperation has a way of opening doors pride keeps locked. What happened next wasn't dramatic, at least not in the way transformation stories usually unfold. There was no moment of sudden clarity, no overnight revelation, just gradual noticing, the kind that sneaks up on you when you stop forcing outcomes. The first thing she noticed was how her body responded differently to variable resistance. Unlike fixed weights that challenged you most at specific points in a movement, elastic bands created tension that increased progressively throughout the entire range of motion. Her muscles were working harder in ways she hadn't anticipated. Researchers at the University of Wisconsin found something fascinating about elastic resistance training. It activates muscle fibers differently than traditional weight training, recruiting stabilizer muscles more effectively throughout each exercise. The constant tension demands continuous neural engagement, which means your brain and muscles are communicating more actively from start to finish. She started small, almost embarrassingly so. Banded squats in her living room while coffee brewed, lateral walks while watching morning news, chest presses anchored to a doorframe between work calls. The simplicity felt almost suspicious, like she was getting away with something. Part of her still doubted it could work. After all, she'd spent years believing that progress required suffering, that ease meant inadequacy. But her shoulder began speaking a different language, one of relief rather than resistance. Somewhere around week 3, something shifted. She realized she was moving through her days with less tension, not just physically, but mentally. The guilt of missing gym sessions evaporated because her workouts had dissolved into her life, rather than demanding to be scheduled around it. But what she couldn't explain yet was why she felt stronger. Not just in muscle tone, which was definitely happening, but in movement quality. Her posture had changed. The chronic lower back tightness she'd accepted as permanent had begun releasing. She moved through space with more confidence, more fluidity. A colleague noticed before she did. "You are standing differently," they said during a lunch break. "Like you're taking up more space." It was the kind of compliment that lands deeper than intended, because it wasn't about appearance, it was about presence. The science behind this transformation isn't mysterious, though it often gets overshadowed by flashier fitness trends. Elastic resistance creates what biomechanics experts call accommodating resistance, meaning the challenge adapts naturally to your strength curve. You're never under-challenged or dangerously overloaded. Your body finds its optimal working zone almost automatically. She thought she was done exploring new fitness approaches, until that moment when she realized her relationship with exercise had fundamentally changed. This wasn't about sculpting an ideal body anymore. It was about inhabiting her actual body with more skill, more kindness, more capability. The portability factor became unexpectedly liberating. Business trips no longer meant workout interruptions. Family visits didn't require searching for guest gym passes. A small bag of bands traveled everywhere, making consistency possible in ways rigid gym routines never had. Maybe she was chasing the wrong goal all along. Instead of trying to become someone else through punishment disguised as discipline, she was learning to work with her body's actual design, its natural movement patterns, its need for both challenge and sustainability. Physical therapists have known this for decades. Elastic resistance allows for exercise modification in real time. Feeling strong, step further from the anchor point. Feeling fatigued, move closer. Your workout adjusts to you, not the other way around. This responsive training creates a feedback loop that traditional weights can't replicate. There were still hard days, moments when motivation failed and consistency wavered. She wasn't suddenly immune to the very human struggle of showing up for yourself when no one's watching. But the barrier to entry had lowered so dramatically that even her worst days could accommodate 10 minutes of banded work. She laughed one morning, realizing progress didn't always look like progress. Sometimes it looked like doing less but feeling more. Like prioritizing movement quality over movement quantity. Like measuring success by how you feel moving through the world rather than how you look standing still. What surprised her most wasn't just the physical changes, though those were real and measurable. Her arms had definition she hadn't seen since her 20s. Her legs felt powerful in a functional way that went beyond aesthetics. Her core engaged naturally throughout daily activities, providing stability she hadn't realized she was missing. But the deeper shift was psychological. Without the intimidation factor of gym culture, without comparing herself to others mid-workout, without the performance anxiety that comes with public exercise spaces, she'd found something closer to joy in movement, or at least something closer to peace. Research from the Journal of Strength and Conditioning confirms what she was experiencing. Elastic resistance training produces comparable strength gains to traditional weight training when matched for intensity, but with significantly lower injury risk and greater flexibility in exercise variation. The bands allow for three-dimensional movement patterns that mimic real-life activities more closely than fixed-plane machines. She started noticing other benefits that hadn't been on her radar. Her joint health improved dramatically. The chronic knee clicking that had worried her for years became less frequent, then disappeared entirely. Her ankles felt more stable. Her shoulders moved through their full range without that familiar catching sensation. Part of her wanted to share this discovery with everyone, but she also understood that what worked for her body, her schedule, her particular constellation of needs, wouldn't translate identically to anyone else. Fitness isn't universal. Bodies aren't standardized. What matters is finding the approach that you can sustain, that serves your life rather than demanding you reorganize everything around it. Then came the moment that surprised her most. She was helping a friend move furniture, something she'd always dreaded because it meant acknowledging physical limitations she wasn't ready to accept. But this time, her body responded differently. She lifted, twisted, and carried with competence that felt effortless. Functional strength had been building quietly while she wasn't obsessing over it. Sports scientists call this transfer of training effect, when improvements in controlled exercise settings translate to better performance in unstructured real-world movements. Elastic resistance training excels at this because it requires constant stabilization and multidirectional control, training your nervous system to coordinate complex movement patterns rather than just building isolated muscle groups. Sometimes, we only understand strength when it's tested outside the context where we've been cultivating it. Her strength hadn't been proven through gym performance metrics but through living more capably, moving more freely, existing in her body with less negotiation and compromise. What would you do in that moment when you realize your approach to self-improvement might have been working against your actual needs? When you discover that what you thought was discipline was actually a subtle form of self-punishment dressed in wellness language? She couldn't pinpoint exactly when the shift completed, but she knew she'd crossed a threshold. Exercise had stopped being something she did to her body and become something she did with her body, as a collaboration rather than a domination. The elastic bands themselves became almost symbolic. These simple tools that expanded and contracted, that met her wherever she was and worked from there. They didn't demand she show up at a certain capacity, they didn't judge her starting point. They just provided resistance proportional to her effort, which was perhaps the most honest feedback any fitness tool could offer. What surprised me most wasn't just how resistance bands improved my experience with strength training, but how everything started to feel different once I switched to the right method. I wasn't expecting such a clear change, and honestly, I tested it more than a few times before I figured out what really worked. This isn't a promotion, just sharing real results that made a noticeable difference for me. I'll leave the link below if you want to explore what I mean. She began to understand that transformation isn't always linear or dramatic. Sometimes it's accumulative, built from small consistent choices that compound over time into something you couldn't have planned or predicted. The body responds to sustainability more reliably than it responds to intensity. Her relationship with her own capability had fundamentally reorganized itself. Where she once saw limitations, she now saw starting points. Where she once felt inadequacy, she now felt curiosity about what was possible with patience and proper tools. There's something powerful about discovering that the obstacle between you and your goals might not be lack of discipline or insufficient suffering, but simply the wrong approach for your particular body, schedule, and life circumstances. That what works for someone else might be exactly wrong for you. And that's not a failure, it's just information. Physical fitness culture often operates on the assumption that more is better, that harder is superior, that visible struggle indicates genuine effort. But she'd discovered a quieter truth, that sustainable challenge beats unsustainable intensity every single time. That longevity in practice matters more than perfection in performance. Her friends started asking what had changed, not just about her appearance, though that had shifted noticeably, but about her energy, her confidence, the way she carried herself through conversations and crowds. She struggled to explain it without sounding like she'd joined a cult or discovered some secret that would sound trivial in translation. How do you tell someone that rubber bands changed your life without sounding ridiculous? How do you convey that sometimes the most profound shifts come from the simplest adjustments? That revolution doesn't always announce itself with fanfare. When she looked in the mirror again, it wasn't her reflection that had changed. It was what she believed about herself. She saw someone who'd stopped forcing and started listening, who'd released the fantasy of transformation through punishment and found something more sustainable, more genuine, more aligned with actual human capability. The bands still sit in the corner of her bedroom, coiled like colorful possibilities waiting to be stretched. She uses them most days, not with religious fervor but with pragmatic consistency. Some days the workout is ambitious, some days it's just maintenance. Both matter equally because both keep the conversation between her body and her intentions active and honest. She's learned that strength isn't just about how much you can lift or how hard you can push. It's about building capacity that serves your actual life, that helps you move through your days with more ease, more capability, more inhabitation of your own physical presence. This isn't a story about perfection achieved or goals completed. It's about process discovered, about finding an approach that works with your life rather than demanding you rebuild your life around it, about tools that meet you where you are and expand from there rather than requiring you to arrive already transformed. Somewhere between the failures and the quiet mornings, she found rhythm, and with rhythm came peace. Not the peace of having arrived, but the peace of being sustainably in motion, of progress that doesn't demand you sacrifice everything else that matters to keep showing up. Tell us what part of this story resonated most, and where you're watching from. See you in the next video. Bye.